Hi, this is AJ Hogue, and today I am going to talk to you about an old student that I had, and also I'm going to talk more about why I decided to create the effortless English system, about why I felt it was important, and why I felt that something new was necessary. So I'm really just telling you my own personal story and the reasons for the effortless English system. Of course, the effortless English system, the teaching system, is used in all of the effortless English lessons. Effortless English is my own personal company. And also in all Learn Real English lessons. Learn Real English is a company I have with my two good friends, Joe Weiss and Kristen Dodds, who are also excellent teachers. These companies have a slightly different focus, but they both use the same system for teaching spoken English. So anyway, let me tell you another story. Now, this story happened when I was teaching English in San Francisco. So I was an English teacher in San Francisco. And most of my students, in fact, all of my students, were adults from other countries, mostly young adults, so people in their 20s usually, who came to San Francisco to do intensive English study. So they came from Asia, they came from South America, and they came from Europe and the Middle East. Those were the main areas, which is most of the world, really, that they came from. And the goal of most of these students was to improve their spoken English. Most of these students already knew lots and lots and lots of grammar, too much grammar, in fact. And they had already studied a lot of academic English in their own countries. And so what they wanted was experience and improvement with real spoken English. Right? So that makes sense. They came to the United States, to San Francisco, in order to improve their spoken English. Now, what was interesting was that most of the students who came to our school thought that they were already advanced. See, in their own countries, they had studied so much English in schools, in colleges and universities, in conversation schools, and with private tutors. They'd studied and studied and studied and taken all these tests, and everybody told them they were advanced, right? They were using all the advanced textbooks, for example, and they were in the advanced classes back in their home country. But what happened was that when they arrived in America, in San Francisco, they discovered that they could not understand the Americans. For example, they would be at a bus stop, and an American would be next to them at the bus stop and start talking to them. And these poor students would be totally confused and not really understand what the person was saying. And then when they tried to talk, the other person, the American person, didn't really understand them. And it was always a really big shock for these students. They came to America thinking they were advanced, and they discovered that with spoken English, in fact, they were not. Now, with reading, they could do quite well. They were reading very advanced English. They could read newspapers, many of them, in English, like the New York Times, for example, and understand it. Quite advanced vocabulary. But their reading ability was high. However, their spoken ability, listening and speaking, was quite low. So that was the situation. And they would come to my class, frustrated, saying, "Oh, AJ, I thought I was advanced, and I can't understand anybody, and people don't understand me, and I'm having trouble meeting Americans and communicating," and they were very, very upset and emotional about it. And so then I would try to teach them the effortless English system, the system I was developing at that time. Now, at that time, it was new. I was still developing it, still trying some new ideas, but I had most of the general ideas and principles already. And I remember one particular example. And actually, I would say two examples. Two Korean students, Jackie and Jeannie. Now, both of these students, I'd say, were a similar level. And they came to my class, and I told them both the same thing. I told them about the 7 rules, for example, my 7 rules of effortless English. I didn't call them the 7 rules at that time, but, I told them they needed to listen a lot and focus on listening first. Don't worry about speaking, just focus on listening a lot. And that they needed to focus a lot on very easy listening. I told them they needed to read English, but not formal academic English. Not textbooks, not even newspapers, but instead to read very easy novels that used common, casual English. I told them to forget grammar, to throw away their grammar books, stop analyzing grammar. I told them to stop worrying about tests. All the things that I teach you in my email course, I told them. Now, the reason I find these 2 students very interesting, and I find their stories to be interesting, is that each of them did something very different after hearing my advice. One of them, Jeannie, took my advice and basically followed my advice. She started reading a lot of easy novels and books and things. She started listening to my podcast and listening. I was just starting at that time to record some of my lessons, so she started listening to those recordings. And she found other fairly easy English to listen to. She listened a lot. She didn't study grammar. She didn't focus on textbooks at all. The other student, Jackie, did the opposite. See, Jackie was obsessed, totally obsessed, meaning totally focused in an almost crazy way on the TOEFL exam, passing the TOEFL exam. And so Jackie ignored my advice. And instead, what Jackie did was every single day, she studied and studied and studied TOEFL preparation books. She took lots and lots and lots of sample TOEFL tests. She studied tons of grammar, constantly trying to memorize and re-memorize grammar rules. She studied huge, long lists of vocabulary, trying to memorize vocabulary words. And she studied them again and again and again with tons of flashcards, trying her best to memorize, hundreds of words, thousands of words. She did the opposite, in other words, of everything I advised her to do. She totally did the opposite of the 7 rules. And what's interesting is the results they got. Because after one semester, say 4 or 5 months, Jeannie made progress. She improved her speaking quite quickly. After 4 or 5 months, her speaking had improved a lot. She started to make friends. She went to a church, so she was really religious person. So she went to a church and started meeting lots of American people at the church and talking to them and connecting with them. And she found that she could communicate with them because she was doing all this listening, and she started feeling much more comfortable with spoken English. And she made quick progress. Jackie, on the other hand, did not. She came to me very frustrated because after 4 or 5 months, she took the TOEFL exam and she failed. And when I say failed, I mean she did not get the score she needed in order to get into an American university. She wanted to go to a nursing program, to become a nurse in the United States. And to become a nurse, to get her nursing license in America, she had to have a certain TOEFL score. And she did not get it. She did not get that score. So she came to me upset. Oh, AJ, what should I do? I studied and studied and studied, and I studied every day. I took all these TOEFL tests, and I didn't pass it. Oh, I'm frustrated. So I said, okay, Jackie, remember what I said. I said, stop taking those TOEFL tests, get rid of those TOEFL books, and follow my system. You need to read lots of easy novels. I want you constantly listening to English, but not the television, not difficult stuff, fairly easy stuff until you can understand it automatically. Then you can listen to a lot of English that's a little bit more difficult until that becomes very easy, etc., etc. I said, I want you to totally stop thinking about grammar, stop studying grammar, burn your grammar books, burn your TOEFL books. And she was very hesitant. She looked at me like I was crazy. It's like, oh, I don't know. Okay. And then she walked away. Several months passed, and she continued doing the same thing. In fact, I always would see her at the downtown Borders bookstore in San Francisco. They have a little coffee shop in there. And I used to go there a lot and, read books, buy books. And I would always see her in there studying. And every time I saw her, guess what she was studying? TOEFL books, TOEFL test books, and grammar books, and vocabulary lists. So she continued using the same system she had learned in school in Korea. And after several more months, she took the TOEFL exam again, and no improvement at all. Of course, she was taking the new TOEFL exam, which has speaking and listening, a lot of speaking and a lot of listening. It's not just a grammar test anymore. The new TOEFL exam requires a fair amount of speaking and listening, a fair amount of spoken English, real spoken English. Even though the TOEFL test is very academic, the vocabulary is very academic, it's focused on school vocabulary, it still now has a good amount of speaking and listening on it. And she didn't improve her score. And so, of course, what happened? She came back to me again, super frustrated and upset. Oh, AJ, I didn't pass the test again. What should I do? I'm so upset. Oh, my God. And, of course, I said, did you do what I recommended? Because I always see you studying TOEFL books. And she made a lot of excuses. Yeah, but I have to study the TOEFL books. And I said, no, you don't. Studying the TOEFL books is not going to help you. Get rid of those books, do what I tell you, and I guarantee your TOEFL exam score will improve. Now, unfortunately, she never listened to me, at least not while I was at that school, because a few months after that, I left the school, and yet sometimes I would still go by the bookstore down in downtown San Francisco and see her still studying TOEFL books, still memorizing grammar books, still trying to memorize vocabulary lists. And, she just kept doing the same thing and getting the same bad result. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people like her. A lot of people who are stuck in this school mentality, this system, this mentality that they learned in middle school, high school, university, conversation schools, in their home countries, and they're just stuck with this same thing. Study textbooks. Grammar is the key to everything. Memorize vocabulary. Take lots of tests. Practice fake dialogues and drills. Right? This is what happens in schools all over the world, everywhere. And they're just not very effective. They're just not effective for most people. Yes, for a few people, it might work. People who are super analytic and they're super mathematical in their thinking and they just love memorizing. They have super photographic memories. I don't know, maybe there are a small percentage of people who can use those systems and that way of learning and succeed. But in my experience as a teacher, it's only maybe 5% of the students. The other 95% do not do well using the methods taught in schools. And that's why I felt compelled. In other words, I felt I had to, that I must develop a better system, a new system to help my students. I didn't like to see my students so frustrated. I didn't like to see them so upset. I hated to see them failing again and again and again. I didn't like seeing them coming to America feeling confident that they were advanced, and then discovering that they actually could not communicate verbally with Americans. I didn't like seeing that. I could see they were suffering. I could see they were frustrated. I could see that they were also sick of English and bored with studying all these damn rules and memorization of lists and all that stuff. And I realized that they were not the problem. These were good people. My students were very intelligent. Most of my students were very motivated. In other words, they worked hard. Jackie worked hard. I mean, she studied hours and hours every day after class. So she came to my class 4 hours every day. Then she went home and studied, 3 or 4 or 5 hours more. She was not lazy. She was not stupid. The problem was her beliefs. She was stuck in this school mindset, this school mentality. She was stuck using terrible methods that are not very effective. And she was stuck in frustration. And even though she was kept getting the bad result, she was afraid to try something new because all her life she had been taught this one way, that it was the correct way, the only way. And she was afraid to change it and do something different.